All right, so we're going to be looking at our first piece from Africa. I shared with you guys the introduction for the Liney page for Africa, and so now we're going to be looking at our first work from Africa. This is a structure, and it used to be an entire civilization area. Now, of course, it's in ruin. So this is the conical tower and great circular wall of what is referred to as Great Zimbabwe. So Great Zimbabwe is where a cultural people group called the Shona lived. And this is in what is now called Zimbabwe, but the work of art itself is actually called Great Zimbabwe. So this is where that word comes from. So the Shona people. The media there, it says coursed granite block. So that's just referring to cut, like it's kind of like a rough cut of the granite blocks. And then if you'll notice, the picture at the top has that kind of tower, right, sticking up in the middle. So that is going to be what we're calling here the conical tower. It's also called a granary. And then the picture at the bottom down here will give you an idea of the structure. And it was never all the way closed in, right? It's just this kind of partial wall that went around this kind of main living area. So one of the things we talked about a lot with the Incan, in Peru, is this idea of social class and social class determining where you live in the city. So for example, Cusco, right, was divided up. It was not only divided up to be shaped like and laid out like the entire Incan civilization, right? Remember Cusco, but it also was divided up by social class. And so one of the things to consider here with Great Zimbabwe is it is also divided up by social class. And so there's kind of three different main areas where one could live here. And so we'll look at that and we'll talk about that. I'm going to click on that video on the screen and hopefully it will play for you guys. Play for us.
The Stone Kingdom, Great Zimbabwe National Monument. This historical site is surrounded by many large rocks. It's a vestige of a kingdom that once flourished in southern Africa between the 9th and 15th centuries.
So this is giving a whole
Zimbabwe
overview.
means the House of Stone. The country was indeed named after this historical monument. The site, built of large natural stones, was a royal residence for the king.
So that'll give you function, right? The main part of the site up in the mountains. And so this is actually overlooking the part we just looked at that's down in the plain. So the side up in the mountains is the king's site. So the king is even separated out from the queen. And so Great Stone, right? So we're talking about the entire name of the nation is based on this site.
Stone wall is 7 meters high. The earthen floor and furnace remain in their original state. The Shona people founded the kingdom. They came from the Sahara Desert, migrating southwards. They finally settled and founded a stone civilization here. The site had ritual sites and cemeteries.
So add that into function. So not only is this residential, right? It's a town, it's a civilization. It also is going to have ritual sites. And you guys may have noticed that kind of round space that they showed us with what looked like a fire pit in the middle. That would be kind of similar to the kiva we saw with the Anasazi Pueblo at Mesa Verde.
This was also one of the important places. A shout from here would have echoed right to the bottom of the hill. It was useful for passing on messages.
I love that. So this kind of reminds me a little bit of Chauvin. At Chauvin, we talked about how they had those galleries under the ground, right? Those tunnels. So this was in Peru, our first work we looked at in Conte Area 5. And that's the one where they would be given you know, a drug, and they would go in and they would become disoriented, and they would hear the drums, and everything would echo, and it would make these crazy sounds. And that would seem like the mountains were alive. So here they're utilizing sound, they're utilizing this crevice in the rock, but not just in a you know, spiritual, where's that coming from way, but also in a very practical way of amplifying sound. So if you can't text, you can't call, you don't have, you know, a sonar system to send, this is going to be the way that they can communicate from the king's residence up on the mountain to the queen and everyone else in their realm down below on the vista there. And he can literally overlook.
It had 6,000 houses, and at its peak, 18,000 people lived here. The kingdom was a trading stopover and became wealthy with gold mined in nearby areas.
And so trading stop, that could also kind of come into context. It was also a culture that was really well known for livestock, for being able to cultivate livestock, which was part of their, of course, diet, but also their trade and work animals.
Between the town and the Royal Hill is a circular monument made with stone bricks. It's known as the Great Enclosure. It's believed to be either the Queen's residence or a temple. Granite blocks were cut into the same size and stacked up from the ground. There are no straight lines or right angles. It was entirely built in curves. It shows that stone masonry techniques at the time were highly developed. A conical tower stands inside. It's shaped like a granary and believed to have represented the power of the king. The descendants of the Shonas, the original people who founded the kingdom, still live in this area. The once flourishing kingdom suddenly disappeared during the 15th century. However, the Shona people who founded the kingdom continue to recount their glorious days in song.
So we have that continuity of the same people groups still living in this area, and I think that's important to note as well. So one of the things that, of course, we have to consider when we're talking about this male area up on the mountain, and then you have this, what is likely the female's residence down below, is the conical tower, of course, then becomes a phallic form. It is a kind of imposition of the masculine in the realm of the feminine. And I would definitely for this work also say something about that innovation, the fact that they could build these really tall towers of rock without mortar that are stacked together in such a way that they are still standing, for the most part, still standing. And so this is just a really important innovation. Again, I would talk about for this, for form, talk about the curves, those organic shapes. There's very little here that has right angles or straight edges. It is very much that flowing curve, organic. A lot of the stone walls have this really interesting pattern at the top. And so you can see this way up here at the top. And then I wanted you guys to see a picture with some people in them. Now these are children, but still to give you an idea of the scale. So we're talking about 36 feet. There's about 820 linear feet of wall. Again, all this made by stacking these stones together. And when this was uncovered, when Great Zimbabwe was uncovered by European travelers, colonizers coming from England, they insisted that they must have been here before. And that happens over and over and over again in Africa. And it's very, very sad to insist that, well, we don't remember building this, because they just assume that they are, that they'd be looking at a culture here that was subpar. to them. It's very, very sad and untrue. But they considered themselves the only cultures capable of building like this. One of the things that I want you guys to be sure of writing down, probably under content or maybe form, there are these soapstone birds that are set up in different places throughout the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. And they are associated as being this kind of ancestral power, royal power of the kings. And so this is still going to be an area that is, part of the patriarchy, right? It's going to be kind of controlled over by the male leader. And so there are these kind of soapstone birds, and I have this picture of them down here at the bottom. They're abstracted, of course, but they represent power. We talked about how that granary shape, that tower in the middle, is likely a phallus form. Gold nearby, gold mining nearby. And I love this picture because it just gives you a sense of how those walls would enclose you, right? And they would fill your field of vision. So you would feel this power, protection, and strength. The rock at this side is a type of granite. Again, this is fit together without any mortar. It's done so that the stones, similar to Incan, although they're not tight fitting like the Incan, but they have that kind of slope as they go back into the wall, so they fit together well. The granite that is used here is local. It is close to the site, so this is not like Stonehenge where they brought something from far away. This is local granite, and it's granite that splits easily. And I say easily, I mean relatively easily. So they were able to create the pieces by kind of fragmenting, almost like slate will fragment. We don't know much about the specifics of this group initially. Of course, we can understand them from their oral traditions and the Shona people. But we do understand that there is a ruling class here. There's elite. We talked about the fact that it's divided by different social class. So again, only the stone edifices, right? The stone structures, only the elite would live in those. The king can live up on the hill, right? We have the kind of the queen's realm, or what we view as the queen's realm on the vista, on the plains, and then you have the uppermost elite living within the stone. And then the further out you go, there were mud brick homes. The mud brick homes were for the regular people, right? And so where you live within this civilization, even what your home is made out of, is determined by your social class. Similar to what we saw at the Alhambra, right, which was kind of divided up. You could see different levels of finish out, niceties based on class. We saw the same thing with Versailles, right, the amount of space given to different individuals. So this is not a new idea for us. And then we talked about it with Cusco, Cusco as well. We don't think that these were, because we tend to think, okay, wall, it's got to be defensive. But likely this was to show power and strength because of the scale, and then to show that separation between the wealthy and the privileged and the not wealthy and privileged. Again, the people who did not have this privilege lived in what we call daga, which is like an adobe home. All right.